واعلم هديت أن أفضل المنن علم يزيل الشك عنك والدرن ويكشف الحق لذي القلوب ويوصل العبد إلى المطلوب.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وسيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم آمين. So this is the beginning of book 3 inshallah ta'ala, from the series, our series of Al-Mutun Al-Ilmiyah. So this is the third matan. Bifadlillah ta'ala, we were able to complete the first two mutun. So the first one was Khulasata Tadhim Al Ilm, and the second was the matan Thalatha Al-Usool. And inshallah ta'ala, today we will be starting the third matan in our series, which is Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, or Manzumat Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah للشيخ الإمام عبد الرحمن بن ناصر السعدي رحمه الله تعالى رحمة واسعة. So before we start reading the matan itself and the lines of poetry or the poem, we need to first introduce ourselves and to do an introduction to the science of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. Okay? So tonight, inshallah ta'ala, the mabahith, the topics that we will be covering are: number one, what is Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah? The meaning of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, linguistically and technically. And then the second, inshallah ta'ala, topic is: what is the difference between Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah and Al-Qawaaid Al Usooliyah? Okay, and what is the difference between Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah and Al-Dawaabit Al Fiqhiyyah? Okay. Number three, how are Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, how are they divided? What categories or what different divisions are there? Number four, istimdad wa nash'atu hadha al-ilm. Yani, where did this science come from? What is the source and the essence of this science? Number five, ما هي فوائد دراسة هذا الفن أو هذا العلم? What do we benefit from studying this matan? What do we benefit from studying this matan, and why do we need to study this matan? So firstly, معنى القواعد الفقهية. So brothers, inshallah, you will be introduced to many definitions and ta'rifat. So inshallah, pay attention, concentrate and focus, inshallah. Remember in the first lesson back in September, when we started Khulasata Tadhim Al Ilm, we learned that knowledge, al-ilmu yudraku bi thalathati umur. Knowledge is attained with three things. What's the first one? Lafdhun yuhfadh. Lafdhun yuhfadh. What's number two? Ma'nan yufham. And what's number three? Muqtadan yura'a wa yu'mal bihi. So number one, for those of you who weren't present, lafdhun yuhfadh. A word or a statement that is memorized. Knowledge is all about kalimat and mufradat and alfadh. Okay? The Quran consists of ماذا? كلام الله تعالى مفردات. The Sunnah كذلك. So لفظ يحفظ. So these alfadh الشرعية, they are not like our alfadh. Okay? These are alfadh that are sacred texts. So they are the words of Allah, the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we need to understand muradullah ta'ala wa muradul Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam bihadhihi kalimat. We need to know, what does Allah mean by this word? What does the Prophet mean by this word? Hence why we need to define everything. Before we even engage in it, we need to define this. What is this? This is Islamic law. Okay, so everything is precise. So that's the alfaz that you have to memorize. Then these alfaz that you've memorized, you have to understand what they are. Okay? And then once you've understood what they are, then you have to act upon them. Okay? And this goes for every science. In fiqh, in usul, Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, Tawheed, Lugha, Nahu, Balagha, everything. Okay? So, firstly, معنى القواعد الفقهية. So, Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, okay, is a lafdhun murakkab, basically. it is a science that consists of two words. The first word is Al-Qawaaid, the second word is Al Fiqhiyyah. Okay? So Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, first word Al-Qawaaid, second word Al Fiqhiyyah. The first word Al-Qawaaid is the plural of what? Qaa'idah. It is the plural of Qaa'idah. And Qaa'idah has two meanings linguistically. Linguistically, the word Qaa'idah has two meanings. The first meaning is Al-Thabatu wal-Istiqrar. Al-Thabatu wal-Istiqrar, which means something that is constant and concrete. Something that is constant and concrete. Okay, something that is constant and concrete and firm. That's the meaning of Qa'idah, the first meaning of Qa'idah. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَالْقَوَاعِدُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْقَوَاعِدُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ اللَّاتِي لَا يَرْجُونَ نِكَاحًا. So here, قَوَاعِد مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, women that are considered to be at an old age. So their age is old and that age is an age that is constant. That age is an age that is mustaqir and constant. That's the first meaning of Al-Qawa'id. The second meaning of Al-Qawa'id is أساس الشيء وأصوله. The foundation of something is considered to be a qa'idah. The foundation of something is considered to be a qa'idah or a pillar. So pillar, foundation. وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ, Allah says. Okay, وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ. So those are the two meanings of Al-Qawa'id. And Al-Qawa'id or the word Qa'idah, we're talking about linguistically, lughatan, because once you understand the linguistic term, then the legislative term becomes easier. تطلق القاعدة ويراد بها أمران. Okay, the Qa'idah linguistically is divided into two. Number one is Al-Qawaa'id Al-Hissiyyah. Al-Qawaa'id Al-Hissiyyah, يعني قواعد or foundations that are basically concrete or can be touched. Okay, such as the concrete such as the pillars or the foundation of a building. This is a qa'idah. The second is قواعد معنوية, metaphorical foundations. Metaphorical foundations. So they are foundations that are, for example, the foundations of Usool Al-Fiqh, the foundations of Nahu, the foundations of a science, for example. This is metaphorical. It's not something you can touch and tangible, it's metaphorical. Jameel. So that's with regards to Al-Qa'idah linguistically. And the word Qa'idah, just on its own, Ya Ikhwani, okay, has a ta'rif يعني istilahan, has a legislative terminology, the Qa'idah on its own. And that is حكم كلي ينطبق على جميع جزئياته. That it basically it is a all-inclusive ruling that covers all of its branches. Are we talking about Qa'idah Fiqhiyah here? لا. Are we talking about Qa'idah Usuliyah? لا. Qawaa'id fi al-Nahu? لا. Just Qa'idah. The science of anything that is a Qa'idah, okay? It is a principle, all-inclusive principle that encompasses all of its branches. We'll talk about branches and what they are soon, inshallah. Okay? So right now, brothers, if this is the first time you've ever studied Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, you're like, like a battery, when you plug it into charge, it should be at 1% now, 3%, 4%. Don't panic. Things will fall into place, inshallah. Just memorize this for now. Then the fahm comes afterwards. And you go home and you look back at it and you ponder over all of this, things will start to click. The jigsaw puzzle. It's like now, think of this method now, like you've got all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but you're putting it together slowly. Okay, so at first it's going to be difficult. What does he mean? You're probably thinking, what does he mean by all-inclusive? What does he mean by branches? What does he mean by all of this? This is too... Inshallah, today, inshallah, tomorrow, the next week, things will fall into place, inshallah. But for now, trying to understand what is being said, inshallah. So, qa'idah, linguistic, and also make sure you draw a map. in your head. So now we're talking about linguistically. Don't confuse this for technically or the technical terminology. We're talking about al-ta'rif al-istilahi here. So the ta'rif al-istilahi is hukmun kulli. It is a hukum, a ruling. What is a hukum, you're probably thinking? We're going to define what is a hukum soon, inshallah. Okay? So a hukum, it is a ruling, an all-inclusive ruling that covers all of its branches. All of its branches, juz'iyat or particles. Okay? Jameel. So that is linguistically what a qa'idah is. Okay? And that is technically what a qa'idah is. So we've covered linguistically what a qa'idah is, technically what a qa'idah is. Now we're going to move on, inshallah, to the next word, which is mada al-fiqhiyyah. Al-fiqhiyyah, okay, is a word ascribing itself to the science of what? Fiqh, to the science of fiqh. Okay. And fiqh linguistically means al-fahm ad-daqiq, precise understanding. Linguistically, fiqh is precision in understanding. Okay? That is what fiqh means. Okay? And istilahan, technically, fiqh as a science. So now we're going to define the science of fiqh. Okay? The science of fiqh. It is معرفة الأحكام الشرعية العملية المكتسبة من أدلتها التفصيلية. It is a mouthful, but we'll learn what it is, inshallah. Now, so it means fiqh. The science of fiqh is to have a معرفة الأحكام الشرعية, an understanding of an understanding of action-based rulings, an understanding of action-based rulings that can be deduced and derived from specific evidences. I repeat, fiqh is to have an understanding of action-based rulings that can be deduced from specific evidences. From specific evidences. Okay, so ما معنى هذا? What does that mean? So firstly, that basically means, let's start from ma'rifah, understanding. So when you write that down, you're going to have to look at this ta'rif, this definition, and try to divide it into different words. Every word there is a separate meaning for every word. So the first word is ma'rifah, understanding. This understanding encompasses two types of knowledges. Okay, the first is al-ilmu wal-dhann, يعني certain knowledge and probable knowledge. In the science of fiqh, we're not in aqidah and tawheed where everything is certain knowledge. In the science of fiqh, you have darajatu al-ilm and darajatu ghalabat al-dhann. So you have two grades of certainties. Certainty of knowledge, certainty of knowledge and probable knowledge. So certainty of knowledge is, we're all certain now in the books of fiqh. When you open the books of fiqh, they talk about مثلا ijma'. So if there's a ijma' مثلا, all of the scholars are unanimously agreed upon the fact that the 5 daily prayers are obligatory and wajib upon every Muslim. So this is, how do we know this? Al-ilm al-yaqini. We know this through, this understanding is an understanding, we are certain of this. There's no doubt. Okay? The second type of understanding, which is probable, is that this ruling is, you're 70-80% sure this is the right ruling. مثلا witr, salatul witr. Salatul witr, is it wajiba or is it sunnah mu'akkada? The evidences are so strong that those who say that it is sunnah mu'akkada can't be 100% sure they're wrong. Okay? For example, there are many fiqh rulings. There are thousands of fiqh rulings where the scholars, where tatajadhabul adilla, the adilla are very strong. The adilla of the first opinion and the second opinion are very strong also. So the mujtahid, the faqih, who's looking at these adilla, he may prefer one opinion because the strength of those adilla are 10% stronger than the other adilla, مثلا, to make it easier to quantify it, right? So his knowledge that this is the hukm is going to be ghalabatul dhann. It is going to be probable knowledge. Probable knowledge. So when we say the definition ma'rifatul ahkam al-shar'iyyah, having understanding, this understanding is either ilmul yaqini, certain knowledge, or probable knowledge. Okay, that's what we mean by understanding. Okay, so not every hukm and every ruling in fiqh you will be 100% sure this is the ruling, that it's wajib or muharram or mubah, etc. Then we move on to the next, al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah. Legislative ahkam is the plural of hukm, which is a ruling, and shar'iyyah is legislative. So legislative rulings. These legislative rulings are 5. It's either يعني wajib, muharram, mandub, mustahab. You don't need to know them for now, but you will learn them in Usool Al-Fiqh. When we learn Kitaab Al-Waraqaat, inshallah, we will learn what these ahkam are. Jameel. Which brings us to the next. So what is a hukm? You always hear this. Mathalan, the mustafti goes to the mufti and says, Ma hukmu kada wa kada. What is the ruling on this? What is a hukm? The word hukm, ruling, ma ma'na hukm. Okay? So hukm, okay, linguistically means to prevent something or to restrict something. To prevent something or to restrict something. So so we understand from the linguistic term of hukm that you're restricting this issue to one particular ruling. Okay? As for istilahan, technically, hukm is إثبات أمر لأمر أو نفيه عنه. Hukm is to ascribe something, okay? إثبات أمر لأمر. It is to ascribe something to something else or to negate it. That is what hukm means, to ascribe something to something else. So if I say مثلا ما حكم هذا الماء ما حكم شرب هذا الماء, what is the ruling on drinking this water? And so I am going to ascribe something to this I'm going to ascribe something to this water, bottle of water, and I'm going to say mubah. Al-hukm annahu mubah. The hukm is that it is mubah. So I have ascribed mubah to mada, to this bottle of water. So that is basically what hukm is. And the ahkam, the ulama rahimahullah ta'ala, that they divide ahkam into 3 different categories. So bear with me, inshallah. The introduction is always going to be very challenging. Then it gets easier, inshallah, because the introduction is I'm giving you the foundations of this science, so that inshallah next week and the week after, once we start learning the qawaa'id, and I say hukmuhu kada wa kada, and I use these words and these terms, you're going to have that glossary in front of you, and you're going to know what I'm talking about, inshallah. Likewise, if you read a book in fiqh, in Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, and you read hukm, shar'an, all of these terms, what they mean, you need to know what they mean, inshallah. Jameel. So al-ahkam yuqassimuha al-ulama ila 3 aqsam. 3. Okay, the first is al-hukm al-shar'i, legislative rulings. Legislative rulings. Okay? What is the hukm shar'i? Huwa khitab al-shar'. Remember khitab al-shar'? We learned this. Okay, khitab al-shar' al-muta'alliq bi-af'al al-mukallafin min talab aw takhyir aw wad'. Jameel. If you understand this now, this introduction is also an introduction for Usool Al-Fiqh. Okay? This is the same introduction that is given to Usool Al-Fiqh. When we learn Waraqaat, we're going to repeat this. Inshallah, you'll understand. Jameel. So, khitab al-shar'. So, al-hukm al-shar'i is the khitab of the legislator. We know what is khitab? What is khitab, ya ikhwan? Speech. Statements of the Quran and statements of the Sunnah. Okay? So it is the khitab of the legislator that is connected to the actions of the servant. Okay? This khitab is connected to the actions of the servant. Okay? From talab, from talab, from seeking, from a command. This khitab, okay, is either a command or an optional or something optional or situational. So let me repeat that again. So it is the khitab of the shari', of the legislator, that is connected to the actions of the statement. Okay? And this khitab is categorized into three. Talab, commands. Talab here isn't just command. Talab is basically the khitab seeking something from you. Seeking something or asking something of you. Asking something of you is better, not command. That's a better translation. And number two, takhyir, the khitab giving you an option. The khitab giving you an option to either do something or not do something. Or number three, wad', a situational khitab. It is a khitab that is situational. And we'll understand what situational is soon, inshallah. Jameel. So that is the first type of hukm shar'i. The second type of hukm is hukm aqli, a hukm or a intellectual ruling, such as, for example, 100% is more than 50%. This is, you know this from the aql. Or for example, that intellectually, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, this is an intellectual ruling. Okay, that's not what we're discussing now. The third type of ruling is rulings based on custom and habit. Rulings based on custom. Okay, or not custom. Rulings based on natural rulings. Natural rulings, such as, for example, fire is hot and water is transparent, or water is wet. These are natural stuff. So we're not discussing the other two. Jameel. Al-Hukm Al-Adi. Al-Hukm Al-Adi. Naam. Jameel. So if we go back to the first ruling, which is the first type of ruling, which is Al-Ahkam Al-Shar'iyya, then Al-Ahkam Al-Shar'iyya is divided into two. So Al-Ahkam Al-Shar'iyya, we said ماذا? Talab, takhyir, aw wad'. صح? So talab is either an amr or a nahi. Okay, command or a prohibition. Okay, that is talab. Okay, so remember maybe you don't know this, but there are 5 ahkam. Okay, wajib, mustahab, 2. These 2, wajib and mustahab, fall into the category of talab. Okay, because wajib is, for example, when Allah Azza wa Jal obligates something, He's asking you to do it. And when Allah Azza wa Jal, when something is mustahab, still Allah is asking you to do it. But this time it's just mustahab. So that falls into talab. Takhyir, number 3, optional, is mada? Mubah. Is mubah. Okay? Is mubah. So takhyir is mubah. Mubah because you have the option of drinking this water. You don't have to drink it. Okay, it's mubah. Wad' is basically situational. And we'll discuss what situational is. Then you have wajib, mandub, mubah, and makruh and haram. Makruh and haram. Makruh and haram also fall into talab. Because Allah Azza wa Jal is asking you not to do this thing. Do you understand? So this definition encompasses all of the 5 ahkam, 5 rulings. So the first qism from al-ahkam al-shar'iyya is al-ahkam al-taklifiyya. Al-ahkam or al-hukm al-taklifi. Rulings that are based upon responsibility, or rulings that are based upon the burden of responsibility. Taklif in Arabic language means a burden, something. Anta mukallafun bikada wa kada. You are burdened with this. Okay, مثلا if I ask you to lift this table, أنا كلفتك بحمل هذه الطاولة. I have burdened you by asking you to lift this table. So it's a burden. Okay? Jameel. So this is known as al-hukm al-taklifi, rulings that are based upon the burden of responsibility. And the ta'rif of this type of hukm is khitab al-shar' al-muta'alliq bi-af'al al-mukallafin min talabin aw takhyirin aw tark. So khitab al-shar', the statement of the shari' that is connected to the actions of the statement, or actions of the servant. That is connected to actions of the servant. Okay? From talab, whether it is Allah asking you to do something, aw takhyir, or something optional, أو ترك, or Allah requesting you to leave and abandon something. To leave and abandon something. Jameel. So now we have talab, we have takhir, we have tark. Talab means asking. Takhir means optional. Tark means to leave and abandon. So wajib and mustahab fall into which one? Talab. Talab. Mubah falls into takhir. Makruh and haram fall into tark. Not tark now, because we have, remember wad', we removed wad' and we put tark. Remember, you have to be vigilant, ikhwani fillah. Okay? We don't have wad' anymore. Wad', the situational one, was the definition, falls into the definition of mada? Al-Hukm Al-Shar'i. Jazakallah khair. Al-Hukm Al-Shar'i. Now we are defining mada? Al-Hukm Al-Taklifi. Because we said that the Al-Hukm Al-Shar'i is divided into two different categories. Right? The first category is Al-Hukm Al-Taklifi. Okay? And Al-Hukm Al-Taklifi is the definition that you have in front of you now. The second qism is Al-Hukm Al-Wad'i, situational rulings. This is very technical, ikhwani fillah. Okay? You need to be very focused and concentrate and vigilant for the next 45 minutes, inshallah. Jameel. So Al-Hukm Al-Wad'i is basically situational ahkam. Situational ahkam. What is situational ahkam? Ma ma'na? It means basically that these rulings are based upon situations, not based upon the actions, not based upon the 5 rulings. So they're based upon situations. So what is the definition of Al-Hukm Al-Wad'i? هو خطاب الشرع, the khitab of the shari' that is connected to the actions of the servant, okay? To the actions of the servant by making something a reason, a sabab for something else, or a condition for something else, or an impediment for something else, or correct or false. Okay, again I'll repeat. So in Arabic language, those of you who are writing in Arabic, الحكم الوضعي هو خطاب الشرع المتعلق بأفعال المكلفين بوضع الشيء سببا أو شرطا أو مانعا أو صحة أو فسادا. Okay, so it is the khitab of the shari' that is connected to the actions of the servant by making something a reason, a sabab for something else. مثلا ما هو سبب وجوب صلاة الظهر? When does صلاة الظهر become wajib? If you're asked, when the time enters. To be more specific, what is this time? عند الزوال. نعم, عند الزوال. So مثلا الآن, hypothetically speaking, if there is no zawal, let's say the clock stops at 11, let's say the zawal is at 12 in the summer, okay, and let's say the clock stops at 11:30, you freeze. Is Salatul Dhuhr wajiba yet? No. The reason for Salatul Dhuhr becoming wajib is mada? When the sun reaches its zenith, zawal. إذا زالت الشمس قيد الرمح, as the hadith states. Okay, so this is a sabab. Jameel. When does Salatul Maghrib become wajib? When the sun sets. Okay, so this is a sabab. So this sabab is connected to Al-Hukm Al-Wad'i. This is the situation in which Salatul Dhuhr became wajib. Do you understand? Okay, so that's with regards to asbab. So مثلا, when you're reading the books of fiqh and a faqih uses this term sabab wujubi هذا كذا وكذا وكذا, he's talking about al-hukm al-wad'i, not al-hukm al-taklifi. As for a shart مثلا, the salah has shurut. مثلا من شروط الصلاة, who can give me one condition of the salat? Al-wudu or al-tahara. Okay, استقبال القبلة, facing the qibla. Okay, these are all al-Islam. These are conditions of the salah. Okay, so these conditions are connected to al-hukm al-wad'i. Some of these shurut are in your power. and some are in your control, and some are not in your control. مثلا, the woman that's in her menses, she's in haid. Okay? When her haid stops, is it in her control? It's not in her control. It's in the hands of Allah Azza wa Jalla. So when her haid stops, she becomes pure, and then the salah becomes wajib upon her. This is known as al-hukm al-wad'i, not hukm taklifi. Shart. So we've covered sabab, we've covered shart, and we've covered mani'. Mani' is an impediment. Okay? So something is wajib, or in order for something to become wajib, then this impediment has to be removed. مثلا, al-hayd wal-nifas. Women that are in their menses. And menses, the al-hayd mani'un min mawani' as-salah. Hayd is an impediment that stops a woman from praying. So this is hukm wad'i or hukm taklifi? Hukm wad'i. Okay? Sihha. Sihha means something that is correct. مثلا, if a person prays without wudu, as-salatu hadihi, this salah is sahiha and fasida? Fasida or batila. Batila. The ahnaf use fasida, the jumhur use batila, usually. There's no difference between the two ala sahih. Jameel. So this salah, when we say sahiha, we are giving a hukum wad'i or hukum taklifi? Wad'i. We're giving a hukum wad'i. Okay? We're not saying it's haram. The salah is not haram. Did we say the salah is haram, or did we say the salah is batila? Batila. So you learn to speak with the speech of the legislation. So the salah hadihi naqul, we don't say this salah is haram. The word haram يعني can't be used, this hukum can't be used to describe a salah. It can be used, it can't. It can be used to describe other things. So we say the salah is batila. So this is known as al-hukm al-wad'i. Jameel. Now you're probably asking yourself, what is the difference? ما الفرق بين الأحكام التكليفية والأحكام الوضعية? What is the difference between rulings based upon burden of responsibility and rulings based upon situation? The difference is the ulama rahimahumullah ta'ala and the fuqaha, they've mentioned a few differences. Number one, the al-hukm al-taklifi is amr, is a command and a seeking. And a command and Allah is asking you to do something. As for al-hukm al-wad'i, then this is the ikhbar. Al-hukm al-wad'i is not asking you to do something, it's telling you that in order for you to achieve this obligation, you need to have X, Y, and Z. Okay? It is the ikhbar. Allah is telling you, is teaching you. Okay? So if you want to pray Salat al-Dhuhr, you have to wait for the Zawal. If you want to pray Salat al-Asr, you have to wait you have to basically wait for the time of Salat al-Asr. Okay? If you want to pray Maghrib wa hakada. So it's giving you that ikhbar. Number two, the second difference is that the al-hukm al-taklifi, the conditions for the hukm al-taklifi goes back, for the conditions for that hukm al-taklifi to become operative, for that person to do this hukum, they go back to the knowledge of the servant and his physical and financial capability. So salah, you have to be physically capable to pray. Okay? If for example a person, or mentally capable as well. So if for example a person is deemed to be insane, this obligation is lifted from them. Likewise, Hajj, the person has to have physical and financial capability, otherwise the obligation is lifted from them. Okay. As for al-hukm al-wad'i, then hukm al-wad'i is not like that. Al-hukm al-wad'i, there is no condition placed upon the servant. Okay? And al-hukm al-wad'i basically is not usually not in this situation is not under the control of the servant. Do you control when the sun sets and the sun rises? No, you don't. You're told when the sun rises, pray this salah. When the sun sets, when the sun reaches this phase, do this, do this. Ramadan becomes wajib mata إذا ظهر الهلال, when we see the moon of Ramadan, it becomes wajib. Okay? So it's not in your control. Hukm al-taklifi is in your control. You can get up, go pray. It's in your control. Qudra. It goes back to the qudra and the capability of the servant. Whereas al-hukm al-wad'i go back to mada, the servant is not in control of it. Okay? Also, al-hukm al-wad'i, for example, let me give you a mas'ala now. مثلا, a child smashes a window. A child takes a rock, smashes a window. This child now, do we deal with this situation with hukm al-taklif or hukm al-wad'i? بمعنى, is this child, did he do something haram? No, why not? Why not? غير مكلف. He doesn't fall into hukm al-taklif. He's not mukallaf. The burden of responsibility has been lifted from this child. He's a child. Likewise, if someone is majnoon, Jameel, but this window that's smashed, the owner of this window now, what do we do with this owner? Do we say to this owner, just because he's a child or she's a child, so you need to go and fix your own window, unfortunately? Is that what we say to them? How do we deal with this situation? How do we deal with it? With hukm al-taklif or hukm wad'i? Hukm wad'i. Okay, we deal with it with al-hukm al-wad'i. So we say to the guardian of this child, you have to pay for that smashed window. Okay? That smashed window, the guardian is not going to be, there's no sin upon the guardian, but they incur the expenses of breaking or smashing that window. Okay? How so? Through al-hukm al-wad'i. This is the adl of our sharia. Jameel. The next farq is that al-hukm al-taklifi is lifted, يعني al-hukm al-taklifi is the hukm of the obligation of يعني connected to al-ahkam al-taklifiyya. They are lifted with three things: with ignorance, jahl, with nisyan, forgetfulness, and ikrah. يعني شو اسمه, what's ikrah in English? Something يعني if you're under duress, forcing, يعني under duress. نعم, if you're under duress. Okay, so the hukum taklif is lifted. Okay, if a person is ignorant of a ruling, okay, then there's no sin upon them. If they forget to pray, there's no sin upon them. They have to, the moment they remember, they have to go and pray. If they are forced to commit an act of sin, there's no sin upon them. It's lifted. That burden has been removed from them. And this is what we're going to learn. The al-mashaqqatu tajlibu al-taysir. We're going to learn this qa'idah. Mashaqqa, hardship, entails ease, inshallah. And that's something we'll learn later. Jameel. So what we learned now, inshallah, all of this was to explain ماذا? معرفة الأحكام الشرعية. Right? الأحكام الشرعية, now you know what it is, right? معرفة الأحكام الشرعية. الأحكام الشرعية تنقسم إلى قسمين. What are they? أحكام تكليفية and أحكام وضعية. And we know what a hukm is. جميل. What's the other part of the تعريف? معرفة الأحكام الشرعية إيش? Deduce المكتسبة من أدلتها التفصيلية. ما معنى مكتسبة? مكتسبة means deduced. So that means that these ahkam rulings can be deduced from somewhere. They're taken from somewhere. Where are they taken from? من أدلتها التفصيلية. From the evidences, specific evidences. Okay? So we learn that Qawaa'id Fiqhiyyah, okay, are taken from specific evidences. Not from, what's the opposite of specific? Not general. Not from general evidences. So now we've learned the definition of al-qa'idah. We've learned the definition of fiqh also, linguistically and technically. Okay? Now we're going to learn ماذا? We're going to learn the definition of al-qa'idah al fiqhiyyah. Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. Okay? So Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah as a unit, as a those two words, as يعني, this means I'm going to try and simplify this, inshallah. نعم. جميل. So نعم. القاعدة الفقهية basically is حكم كلي يتعرف منه حكم الجزئيات الفقهية مباشرة. Okay, في أكثر من باب. So القاعدة الفقهية a principle, a fiqh principle is a comprehensive, all-inclusive principle, okay, by which subsidiary fiqh rulings are known by directly. Again, I repeat. So they are comprehensive, all-inclusive principles, okay, by which subsidiary fiqh rulings or branches of fiqh are known by directly. نعم. So ما معنى هذا? Okay, let's explain this تعريف. So firstly, حكم كلي, all inclusive. So principles of fiqh are all inclusive. It means that they include all of the branches of fiqh. Okay? And also, we use these principles to basically know and the rulings of branches, subsidiary fiqh rulings. So this principle, this all-inclusive principle, like an umbrella, we use this principle to get to the bottom or to know the rulings of branches of fiqh issues, of smaller fiqh issues. Okay? And we know these rulings directly from the principle, the fiqh principle. So مثلا, the principle in and of itself, just by saying the principle, you know the ruling. Okay, so for مثلا, if someone says, يعني I prayed, I got up and the Imam was praying Salatul Dhuhr, but I prayed, I made the intention to pray Salatul Asr. What is the ruling on my salah? Did I pray Dhuhr and Asr? And someone says, Al-Umuru bimaqasidiha, which means basically, issues are considered by the intention. Okay? So this basically ruling, this principle of fiqh is a direct answer to that. You don't need anything else. So the principle in and of itself can be used directly to know the hukm or the rulings of fiqh, subsidiary fiqh issues. Jameel. The next issue, so that's what basically a qa'idah fiqhiyya is. The next issue is, what is the difference between Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah and Al-Qawaaid Al So we need to know this. Why? لابد أن نعرف. Because some people they confuse the two. So you have Usool Al Fiqh and you have Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. You have principles of fiqh and you have principles, Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, principles of fiqh, and you have principles in the fundamentals of fiqh, Usool Al Fiqh. So what's the difference between the two? Now that we know what Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah is, we need to define Usool Al Fiqh. So Usool Al Fiqh is it is a science علم يبحث عن أدلة الفقه الإجمالية وكيفية الاستفادة منها وحال المستفيد. So Usool Al Fiqh is a ilm, it is a science that looks into or researches the evidence, the general evidences of fiqh. And how to benefit from these evidences and the situation of the one benefiting from these evidences. Okay? So from this definition we know that Usool Al Fiqh is a science that looks into general evidences, and Qawaaid Fiqhiyyah is a science that looks into specific evidences. That's the first difference. The second difference is that So when we say general evidences, let me just explain what general evidences is. So Usool al-Fiqh, they looks into general evidences such as Am and Khas. Am, general, Khas, specific. So مثلا, something is Am, something is Khas. So this is the science of Usool al-Fiqh. Mutlaq and Muqayyad, restricted, unrestricted. Zahir wa Mu'awwal wa Nas. All of these are يعني general evidences that Usool al-Fiqh looks into, whereas Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah looks into specific evidences. The next difference is that Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah basically is a science that studies the actions of the servant. So the actions of the servant, what people do every day, this is the science of Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah. And as for Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah, then that's not the case. Then Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah doesn't look look into the actions of the servant. The third difference is that Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah looks at patterns. So Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah looks at patterns. So the scholars مثلا, they looked at hundreds of small issues, and they found that all of these issues come under one umbrella, come under one major ruling principle. So Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah looks at patterns, whereas Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah Al-Usooliyah looks at Arabic terminologies and words. It's a science that looks at the alfaz al-lugha al-Arabiyyah, the alfaz and the specific Arabic terminologies, or the Arabic language. The next, fourth difference, I think number 5, is that Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah basically are all inclusive. Whereas Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah, although we did say they're all inclusive, but the reality is that they are prevailing. They are Qawaa'id Aghlabiyya, which means that certain branches can basically go through the cracks. So they're not 100% all inclusive, whereas Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah are. Also, the final difference is that Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah, we learn the secrets and the beauty of the Sharia from Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah. As for Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah, that's not the case. Obviously, Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah is a different type of science, but when we're looking at the beauty of the Sharia, Maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of the Sharia, then this is something we learn from Al-Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah. Then one more difference, is that Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah encompasses all of the Sharia. Okay? So the Usool Al-Fiqh is a science that encompasses Aqidah. It encompasses Tawheed, Fiqh as well. As for Al-Qa'id Al Fiqhiyyah, then it is a specific science related to Fiqh only. Jameel. So, one major difference that I haven't mentioned, and this is the final one inshallah, is that Al-Qawaa'id Al-Usooliyah, you can't take a ruling directly from a Qa'idah Usooliyah. Okay? So who can give me an example of a Qa'idah Usooliyah? Does anyone know?
Yeah.
No. Did you put your hand up now? تفضل.
Yeah, even less, for example.
لا. So مثلا الأمر يقتضي الوجوب. Okay? الأمر يقتضي الوجوب. الأمر, the command, necessitates an obligation. This is a Qa'idah Usooliyah. So you can't take a ruling from this Qa'idah. So if someone says, ما حكم الصلاة? What is the ruling of Salah? And someone responds and says, الأمر يقتضي الوجوب. Is this an adequate response? No, you wouldn't understand. But if someone has to say, حكم الصلاة واجبة, because Allah says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, and وَأَقِيمُوا is a command, and the command indicates to necessitates an obligation, so they have to explain it. Whereas Al-Qa'id Al Fiqhiyyah, you can take the ruling directly from the Qa'idah itself. So مثلا, if someone says, what is the ruling on someone who makes wudu without any intention to make wudu, without an intention. And we say to this person, al-umuru bimaqasidiha, or innama al-a'malu bin-niyat. Okay? This qa'idah, in and of itself, that's it. You don't need to add anything else. It is enough as a proof. It's understood now. Al-umuru bimaqasidiha. Yani, so we can, yani the rulings can be deduced directly from a qa'idah fiqhiyah. Jameel. We move on to the third mabhath, which is the different categories of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. So firstly, the first category of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah goes back to the sources of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, the Masadir Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. So the first category is Al-Qawaa'id Al-Mansusa, Al-Qawaa'id Al-Mansusa. So Qawaa'id or principles that that go back to the exact wording of the legislator. These qawaa'id, the wording is exactly the same as the legislator. So مثلا إنما الأعمال بالنيات. This is a qa'idah. This is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is a qa'idah that is mansusa, nas, raji'atun ila nas. It goes back to the nas. Okay? So مثل إنما الأعمال بالنيات, for example, لا ضرر ولا ضرار مثلا, الخراج بالضمان. These are principles that go back to the shari'. كل مسكر حرام, for example. Every intoxicant is haram. So this is what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they go back to the wordings of the hadith and the ayat. The second type of qa'idah is al-qawaa'id al-mustanbata. Qawaa'id that have been deduced from the evidences. So the qa'idah itself, the wording has been taken and deduced from the evidences. Okay? An example of this qa'idah مثلا is dar'ul mafasid أو dar'ul mafsadati مقدم على جلب المصلحة. So مثلا repelling a harm is given precedent over attracting a benefit. This principle now, where did it come from? It came from one example is the statement of Allah, وَلَا تُسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Allah Azza wa Jal says, do not insult those who call to, or who pray to other than Allah, so that in case that they may insult Allah Azza wa Jal. So dar'ul mafsada, of course insulting their aliha is a maslaha. It is a benefit, right? Insulting their aliha and making with haqq and with truth, and refuting their aliha, this is something that is a maslaha. It is of benefit. However, repelling evil and repelling harm, which is the fact that they are insulting Allah Azza wa Jal, is given precedence over attracting a benefit. And this is one of the qawaa'id that we'll learn inshallah ta'ala. So this qa'idah is a qa'idah mustanbata. It is not mansusa. It is a qa'idah that has been deduced from the rulings. Okay? It is not a qa'idah. The Prophet didn't say dar'ul mafasid muqaddamun ala jalb al-masalih, and there is no ayah that says this, right? But it's been deduced and derived. Okay. So this is one division, one categorization of al-qawaa'id by looking at the sources of the qa'id. The second categorization of qawa'id is by looking at the all-inclusiveness of the principles, the inclusivity of the principles. Some principles are more inclusive than others, and there are 5 principles. So the first qism, the first type of principle in terms of inclusivity is Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah Al-Kulliyah Al-Kubra. The principles of fiqh, the all-inclusive principles of fiqh, or the major all-inclusive principles of fiqh. Okay, and there are 5. So these 5 principles are the major principles. The ulama, they say that all other principles can fall into these 5 principles. Okay, and they are al-umuru bimaqasidiha. Okay, all matters are considered by their intentions. Okay, this is very important, brothers. So these 5 principles are: number 1, al-umuru bimaqasidiha, all matters are considered by their intentions. The second is al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir, hardship begets ease, or hardship entails ease. The third principle is al-yaqinu la yazulu bish-shak, al-yaqinu la yazulu bish-shak, certainty is not removed by doubt. Certainty is not removed by doubt. The fourth qa'idah is ad-dararu yuzal. Ad-dararu yuzal. Harm is to be eliminated. Harm is to be eliminated. And the fifth qa'idah is al-'ada muhakkama. Customary practices are legislative. Customary practices are legislative. Okay? Now,
Are these all mustanbat? Are these all?
that's a good question. So all of these qawaa'id are qawaa'id that are mansusa. Qawaa'id that are mansusa. Okay? So it means that they are qawaa'id or principles that have... So the mansusa, afwan, whether it's mansusa or mustanbata, firstly, both of them have the same level of hujjiyah. They are both they are both considered as evidences, right? But mansusa means basically that the qa'idah itself, the wording comes from a hadith or an ayah. Not all of these, afwan, I retract my previous statement, not all of these are mansusa. Okay? So some of them are mustanbatas. For example, the first qa'idah, al-umuru bimaqasidiha, this wording is mustanbata. However, there is another wording for the same qa'idah which is innama al-a'mal bin-niyat. This is mansusa. Okay? For example, la darara wa la dirar is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is mansusa. Okay? Al-mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir is mustanbata. Al-yaqin la yazulu bishak is mustanbata. Al-'ada muhakkama is mustanbata. Na'am. The second type of qa'idah in terms of all-inclusivity are the minor all-inclusive principles of fiqh. Okay? And these are principles that fall into majority of the chapters of fiqh. Not all of them, but the majority of the chapters of fiqh. Examples of these qawaa'id, there's many of them, is i'malul kalami awla min ihmalihi. So, مثلا, يعني i'malul kalam, يعني acting upon speech takes precedence over ignoring or neglecting a speech. And there's many other examples such as لا ينسب لساكت القول. لا ينسب لساكت القول. يعني one who is silent, speech is not attributed to the one who is silent. Speech is not attributed to the one who is silent. This is a qa'idah saghira. This is a smaller qa'idah which goes into some chapters of fiqh, but not all chapters of fiqh. The third type of principle is principles of fiqh that are specific to one chapter of fiqh, or a few chapters of fiqh. And they are known as dawabit. So now we're going to learn what are dawabit and what is the difference between a dabit and a qa'idah fiqhiyah. A dabit, firstly, is a controller. What it means basically is that it is a rule. It is a total rule which controls a set of branches that belong to one chapter of fiqh. So they are rules. It is one rule that basically controls a set of branches that fall into one category of fiqh. Example. مثلا, there's a dabit which says كل ماء كل ماء تغير لونه أو ريحه أو طعمه بنجس فهو نجس. Any water that has been altered, any water that has been affected by an alteration in its color or taste or smell with something najis, with something that is impure, then that water becomes mada? Impure. This dabit, does this fall into tayammum? Does this fall into zakah? No, it falls into one branch of fiqh, which is masailul miyah, issues pertaining to water or the purification of water. So there's some scholars, they say this is still a qa'idah fiqhiyya, but it is a qa'idah fiqhiyya sughra. Other scholars, they say it is a dabit. So if ever you see a scholar saying وَهَذِهِ قَاعِدَةٌ فِقْهِيَّةٌ صُغْرَى or من القواعد الفقهية الصغرى, and another scholar says وَهَذَا ضابط, they're talking about the same thing. They're talking about the same thing. Does that make sense, ikhwan? Jamil. So what is the difference between a dabit and a qa'idah fiqhiyya from based on what you've learned? And qa'idah fiqhiyya is? Naam, is more inclusive. It covers the majority of the chapters of fiqh or many chapters of fiqh. Jamil. So now we move on to the tadweenu or the emergence of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. So Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah is a science that basically the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, the Atba'u Tabi'een, it was a science that they knew naturally. It was something that they knew naturally. So they never needed al-umuru bimaqasidiha, al-mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir, because of the fact that they learned and they studied the majority of the Sharia, and they were knowledgeable of mufradatul alfaz or dilalatul alfaz afwan. They were knowledgeable of dilalatul alfaz. They knew the wordings in the Arabic language. It was a science that they knew naturally, such as nahu, for example, Arabic grammar. Arabic grammar, they al-fa'ilu marfu' wal-maf'ul bihi mansub wal-halu mansub, all of these principles of nahu they knew naturally. Likewise, Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. And Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah is a science that is derived and deduced from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is, مثلا, يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر, is the essence of al-mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir, مثلا. Okay? In the Prophet's statement, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, is the essence of al-umuru bimaqasidiha. Al-'ada muhakkama. Yani all of these qawaa'id principles have been taken from the Quran and from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then the scholars, rahimahumullah ta'ala, afterwards they started to notice these patterns in the Quran and the Sunnah. When you look at something for so long and you study something for so long, you're going to notice patterns. And because they were very proficient in the Quran and the Sunnah, they started to see these patterns, and then they started to notice these qawaa'id from these patterns. So the first sheikh to notice these patterns, he didn't actually record these patterns in a book, or he didn't author anything, but he noticed these patterns, was a Hanafi sheikh called Abu Tahir Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Dabbas rahimahullah ta'ala, from the scholars of the Ahnaf. And this was in the 4th century after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he basically, what he used to do was, after Salatul Isha, when everyone left the masjid, he would lock the masjid, he would lock himself inside, and he would repeat these qawaa'id to himself. Okay, and he would repeat them in order not to forget them. And then he would do this every night until one day some people, they noticed him doing this. And then one student he hid himself in the masjid, and he heard the sheikh saying these qawaa'id, and he started to write them down. And he took this science and this knowledge from the mouth of this sheikh. And the Ahnaf, the madhab of the Hanafi madhab, we owe a lot to this madhab. And the whole ummah owes a lot to this particular madhab and the scholars of the Ahnaf, because they were the proponent, they were the first scholars to actually author and record these principles for us, for the ummah. Not the Shafi'i madhab, obviously all of them are ulama, but the fadl after Allah Azza wa Jal goes back to this madhab. The first scholar to author in Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah was Abu al-Hasan al-Karkhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in the year, he died in the year 340. Okay? And he has a book called Usool Al-Karkhi, Usool Al-Karkhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, from the Ahnaf. Okay, so he was the first to author in Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, just like the Shafi'iyah, they were the first to author and to in the science of what? Usool Al-Fiqh, in the science of Usool Al-Fiqh. Jameel. And then those scholars, they authored many works, and every madhab has some mu'allafat and some works and books that they've authored. So the next mas'ala is, what is the benefit and the mission of Al-Qa'id Al-Fiqhiyyah? What is the mission of this science? What does this science wish to achieve? Or the proponents of this science, what do they wish to achieve? Number one, to simplify and assemble the branches of Islamic fiqh. This is the first mission of Al-Qa'id Al-Fiqhiyyah, to simplify and assemble the branches of Islamic fiqh. That's number one. Number two, to extract and organize different branches of rulings under one principle. So to extract and organize different branches of rulings under one principle in order to avoid contradictions. In order to avoid contradictions. Okay? So basically, Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah simplifies for you the branches of Islamic fiqh. You don't need to memorize Masail Ilmiyyah. Obviously, it is good to memorize them, but it is impossible to memorize Al-Masail Al Fiqhiyyah. There's literally hundreds of thousands of Masail, hundreds of thousands of branches of fiqh. Okay? And there are Masail that are yet to be born, called Nawazil. Nawazil are mustajidat, issues that have basically affect the ummah now that did not affect the ummah previously. These are called nawazil. So it's impossible to memorize all these branches. But Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah simplifies this for you and assembles for you the branches of Islamic fiqh. Once you understand these Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah, and then you study fiqh as well at the same time, you start to realize and understand why something has this ruling, why something is wajib, why something is haram, and you then, alhamdulillah, the more you read these qawaid, the more you learn them, the more you understand, and things become more simple for you. Also, you are able to extract and organize the branches of ruling. So you start to, for example, know that in Babul Miyah, there is a qa'idah specific to this bab. In Mathalan Bay', there is a qa'idah specific to Bay'. Mathalan, Al-Bayyi'anu bil-khiyari ma lam yatafarraqa, the Prophet ﷺ said. This is specific to bay'. Yani, the buyer and the seller have the option to either keep or return the goods as long as they have not parted ways. This is specific to madhab bay'. So you learn this qa'idah. So then you learn this qa'idah basically helps you to understand this science. So the qa'idah is serving you. It's helping you to understand it. Without this qa'idah, you'll never understand it. It'll be difficult for you. Okay? Because if you don't understand it, then contradictions come into play. So you won't understand why this is wajib and this is haram. Okay? Why this transaction is lawful and this transaction is unlawful. Okay? وهكذا. جميل. So, مثلا, البيعان بالخيار, if you take this example, now people, for example, buy over the internet, yet this principle is still operative. We still make use of this principle. You go on Amazon and you buy something on Amazon, but when you click purchase, you click the icon purchase, and the transaction happens, and then you get a receipt, then it is as though you have parted ways. The buyer and the seller. You're the buyer and the seller is Amazon. So now that's it. You have no khiyar unless it is mentioned in the contract. But this is something you learn from these principles. Jameel. Number 3, we use Qawaaid Fiqhiyyah to assist scholars to respond to new issues. Nawazil, new issues, new masail. Okay? Number 4, okay, from the mission of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiya is to prove that Islamic fiqh encompasses every community. Encompasses every community, everywhere, anytime and every time. Or, بعبارة أخرى, to prove that Islamic fiqh is suitable for all people at all times in all places. It is suitable for all people at all times in all places. Okay? Understanding also, number 5, understanding Qawaa'id Al Fiqhiyyah increases your iman. Increases your iman because you are able to worship Allah Azza wa Jal upon knowledge and wisdom. And finally, ikhwan, inshallah, finally, this is the last mabhath, inshallah, the last mabhath. It is the hujjiyah of Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah. Is a Qaa'idah fiqhiyah, is it an evidence in and of itself? Is it a proof? Just like an ayah. Okay? If someone says, what is the ruling of salah, and they say, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, no one's gonna say anything, right? It's an ayah or a hadith. So, does a Qaa'idah fiqhiyah have the same power of evidence as an ayah and a hadith? Okay? Jameel. So the answer to this question is that in order to answer this, we need to categorize Al-Qawaaid Al Fiqhiyyah into different categories. So the first category are qawaa'id or principles that are taken from the legislative text. Okay? They are hujjah. They are a source of evidence and have the same power as the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay?
So the mansusa?
Mansusa, na'am, mansusa. An example of these qawaa'id is لا ضرر ولا ضرار. The hadith of Prophet ﷺ, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. There is no harm or no any reciprocating of harm. Or مثلا الخراج بالضمان. The Prophet ﷺ says الخراج بالضمان. يعني any profit goes back to the one who bears responsibility. Any profit of any item goes back to the one who is responsible for this item. Okay? So this is the evidence in and of itself. And وهكذا. So these type of principles, they are evidences in and of themselves. And this is bil ijma'. The second type of qa'idah is principles that their wordings and the wording come from the fuqaha. However, the meanings come from the sharia. Okay? And these type of qawaa'id are also evidences. They are also considered to be evidences. Examples of these qawaa'id are al-umuru bimaqasidiha, al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir, وهكذا. Okay? The third type of qa'idah are qawaa'id istiqra'iyah. Qawaa'id or principles that the fuqaha derived. The fuqaha they derived these principles. يعني from the shari'. So the fuqaha they looked for patterns and they took these qawaa'id, these principles, from general meanings, not from one dalil like la darara wa la dirar or al-umur bi maqasidiha, but from their understanding of patterns within the legislative texts. Okay? Another example is the scholars, they saw many branches of fiqh, and they found that all of these branches of fiqh have one ruling. And then they said, okay, these branches of fiqh, these 100 branches of fiqh have one ruling. Let's make a qa'idah for this. Okay? Let's make a principle for this. And then they made a principle for it. Okay? So, مثلا, any limb, an example is كل عضو حرم النظر إليه حرم لمسه. Any عضو, any limb that is haram to look at in normal circumstances, it is also haram to touch it. Okay? So this is a principle that they came up with by looking at the adilla, and they're looking at the branches. From mathalan, touching the private parts of another person, or sorry, looking at the private parts of another person, haram. Touching it, also haram. وهكذا. Okay, intoxicants. كل مسكر haram. Anything that is an intoxicant is haram. Or يعني anything that intoxicates, even by a small portion, is also haram. وهكذا. So they looked at all of the evidence, all of these branches of fiqh, and they gave it to one qa'idah. So this is known as Al-Qawaaid Al-Istiqra'iyah. Qawaa'id that are basically based upon patterns. And the sahih is that they are not considered as they are basically, we look at them the same way we look at qiyas. So qiyas, for example, or other evidences, qiyas is considered to be an evidence, but there's different types of qiyas, is we basically don't consider them as evidences, but they can support an evidence. They can support as an evidence. There's a khilaf in this annual qism. Some scholars consider them as evidences. Some scholars say that they are not evidences, but rather they support evidences. They support evidences. نعم. بارك الله فيكم. صلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Let me just quickly do the register, inshallah. So this is the end of the book, the first chapter of the book. Next week, inshallah, we will begin the book, inshallah. So next week we'll begin the book.
والحمد لله على التمام في البدء والختام والدوام ثم الصلاة مع سلام شائعي على النبي وصحبه والتابعين.